Okay, so this is an old TVT carbone that I'm rebuilding into the Greg LeMond Team Z colours of the late 80s, early 90s, sometime around that period. This is a bike I always wanted as a student but could never afford, and now I've worked for a few years, I think it's time to treat myself. So I'm slowly building this up and should be riding it within the next few weeks or so. That's my regular ride over there, which is a very nice Mercian, which I've done quite a lot of miles on now, but I just fancy the change. Now this bike has a Campagnolo C-Record group set, apart from the Shimano pedals, which is it's probably going to get me in trouble with some purists, but I don't fancy buying an extra set of shoes just to have the correct pedals. But with C-Record, it also comes with these beautiful Delta calipers, which I think are absolutely astonishing. I think they're fantastic bits of kit, but they are fiendishly difficult to install, I have discovered. So this video is a quick guide on how to install them. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to assume that you know how to put the calipers on the frame and get them in the approximate position. That's not too difficult, and that you also know how to slide the brake levers on the bars. But one of the first things you're going to want to pay attention to, one of the problems I found installing the front, is these brake levers are quite curious inside, and there's one little detail which you need to pay attention to. They're not really that much different from any other brake lever, apart from the fact that when you thread the cable through the inside of the brake lever and arrive at the point where the nipple would normally slot into whatever little receptacle it has, on these levers the receptacle has a slot down the side, which means that when the cable bends, when it's in position through the back of the lever, if you don't keep tension on it, it has a tendency to pop out. And I can guarantee you, if it does that when you're installing the cable, or when you're installing the brake rather, if it does that, you'll never get it back in unless you slide a good length of the cable back out. So that's the first point to bear in mind, is that always keep that cable under tension in there. If it pops out, disaster. Second thing to note is that on these levers you can do things one of two ways. You can either do the old style method of cable routing, which is out the top there. These levers are brand new. I say brand new, they're 25 years old, but they've never actually been used. So there's a cutout in the top there, which hasn't been cut out. That's in case you want to take the cables out the top. I don't want to do that. I want to take them the aero way, out the back. And to do that, first of all, you've got to cut a slot on the back of the lever, which you can see just from the shiny bits of metal. That's what's been done here. And then your cable just goes through that slot to the back of the little hole inside the lever, and that's where things run through. So the routing on this frame is internal, which is quite unusual for the age. The frame is about 1991. Don't often see internal routing on bikes of that age, but it's internal routing through the top tube. So I've already done that, and I've used the original C-Record cable as well, which was quite hard to find, but I eventually found some, and I just have to cut it to length so that it doesn't look silly like that. So all you need to do that is a pair of cutters like this. Don't attempt to do it with your regular sort of cutters, because you'll just make a mess of it. Get the proper tool and you'll have a much easier time. Now, as you can see, clearance here between the caliper and the wheel isn't great. So what you have to do now is take the rear wheel off to finish the next few steps. Next stage, once the rear wheel is off, is to take the faceplate off the caliper. And to do this, quite simple. You just loosen this top here. Just unscrew that a bit, lift this cap up, and get that a bit more maybe. There we go. that just pops straight out to reveal the mechanism. Now, a normal brake caliper cable just comes down the side here into a little hole, a little grip, and it's pretty easy to install. You don't actually have to take the rear wheel off. But the sign of this means that cable comes down here, down through the centre, and is clamped by this nut here. And as you can see, when the brakes are not in use, there's only a tiny little bit of room down there for the end of the brake cable, which is where most of the difficulty in installing these calipers comes from. One other thing to note is that this Allen bolt here is 3.5 millimeters, which is an unusual size. I had to order a couple of Allen keys from the internet. I think I got them from CPC or someone like that. It's not the sort of size you'll normally find in a shop anywhere. Okay, so I've threaded the inner through the outer, as you can see here. Bear in mind, just try and remember to keep tension on the cable down at the lever end. You don't want that nipple popping out. The reason I say that is on a normal brake it wouldn't be a problem, because you'd have it down here and you'd have it clamped and you'd have some excess down there, and if there was a problem down at the lever end you can undo the clamp and you can slide it up and down. But on these there's hardly any space, as you can see just down there. That's approximately, if I cut the cable there, that's approximately how much will be poking out the bottom there. And bear in mind too, here's the bottom of the faceplate there. The tyre is only going to be a few millimeters below that cable, so you've hardly got any room for any excess. So on the front one I haven't been able to use a little, you put one of those little clamp ends on. I forgot the name at the moment. But on these there just isn't the space. You could probably solder it if you were so inclined, but what you'll find is that as soon as you cut it, once it's clamped, the end will fray and it'll look a bit of a mess. So I didn't bother putting a little nipple on the end of it. I just left it a frayed mess. As long as it's clamped, okay, it's fine. I take the view that if I ever have to change this cable, I am literally going to have to change the entire cable, pull it all out. Okay, so I've threaded the cable through the frame and I've put the nice posh end on my outer. And now what you have to do is thread the inner through the caliper. So start at the top there, comes down through the mechanism and through the back of the clamp at the bottom. There's a tiny little hole in there which just can't find for the time being. There it is there. But to open the hole up, you put your 3.5mm Allen key in and you use a spanner just the right size. Just take this bolt out. It's more of a grub screw really. And then once that bolt's out of the way, there it goes. Threads straight through, like so. And it's important as well, before you set the tension on this, to make sure that this is screwed almost all the way down. This is your adjustment, if you like. You know, when you're riding, if the brakes, if the blocks are a little bit too worn, this is the part you adjust to get a little bit more braking power. So screw it all the way down and then just back it off a few turns, give yourself a little bit of room. You can see how the mechanism works like that. So if I just quickly, I'm not going to clamp it properly, but if I just tighten this up like so, so imagine the wheel's in position now, and this is the normal position of the caliper against the rim, sort of braking like that. That's all the space you've got. This is essentially where you have to cut the cable. So to avoid any guesswork on this next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the wheel in the frame and just get an idea of where everything needs to be before I make that final cut If I cut this cable in the wrong place, then essentially I'm going to have to buy a new cable, which is quite difficult because Campagnolo brake cables aren't the sort of things that are often found in shops. You can find compatible ones, but if you want to find the real deal, usually you have to order off the internet, which takes a few days. So I'm going to try and make sure this is done correctly. So the rear wheel's now in. I can get an idea now of where things need to be. One of the nice things about these calipers is that the bolt on the back is adjustable. So if you find that you can't quite get things aligned properly, you can loosen the clamp bolt to the frame and just slide the whole caliper up and down. You don't get much range, maybe, I don't know, a centimetre off the top of my head, but it's generally enough to get where you need to be. So I think that needs to be, that's about there. So we're in the right ballpark. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a cable tie and I'm going to clamp these two halves of the caliper together, just in lieu of a third hand. Okay, so I've had the wheel on and off, and I reckon this is about, the brake blocks are about the width of a wheel in there, being held together by this little cable tie. So I'm just going to double check before I make the cut that everything is okay. So just once again, just loosen that, check everything's nice and tight. Nip it back a little bit. There we go. And come to the point of no return. Take my cutters out and cut. You can see there the cable frays instantly, and there's no way there's enough room in there to get a nipple on, but I just chop this cable tie off. And if you can see, we'll just pull the barrel up. I'm just closing the calipers here by rotating the barrel at the top so I can get the plate back on. Lift the plate up at the top and try and get it in. It's not going at the moment. A bit more. There we go. So take that tension back off by rotating the adjuster at the top. And there we go. That looks okay. A little bit of a test. A little bit of noise there. I suspect that's the frayed end of the cable. I'll have a look at that in a sec. Okay, I think we're just about there. All that's left now is to just tighten these brake bolts in the correct position. That's no different than any other caliper. Just get them in approximately the right position and just hold the two arms of the caliper together and tighten the bolts at the back, but seems to be working okay. And there you go. Looks pretty simple, but I can tell you that only took me about 20 minutes. The first one I tried on the front took me about 2 hours because I'd never done one before. And I almost lost one of the cables because of the mess I made of it. But I hope this helps if you have to install one of these for yourself.